Hey everyone, it's triplemangothreat, and today we're talking about the commander decks that are great for beginners, so let's jump right into it. Starting with Tuvasa the Sunlit, it's green, white, and blue for a 1/1 Merfolk Shaman. Tuvasa is going to get +1/+1 for each enchantment we control, and whenever we cast our first enchantment spell each turn, we're going to be able to draw a card. We can draw even more cards with Mesa Enchantress, Satyr Enchanter, Setessan Champion, and Eidolon of Blossoms. So not only are we drawing from our commander once each turn, but we're also getting cards from these four as well. So it's going to be a rarity when we have no cards in our hand, because casting our enchantments get us more cards. We can even reduce the cost of our enchantments with cards like Herald of the Pantheon and Starfield Mystic. So we're going to be able to cast a lot more enchantments with these out. By making our enchantments cost a little less, that means we can do more in our turn. Now our commander is really important to us. It's important that we have Tuvasa on the battlefield, so we need cards like Alpha Authority and Destiny Spinner. These are going to help protect our commander, because by giving Tuvasa hexproof, our opponents can no longer target Tuvasa, and that's really helpful. And also, Tuvasa can't be blocked by more than one creature, and our commander is going to be having a lot of +1/+1, so now they can't group block, they're only going to be able to block with one creature. And Destiny Spinner is really helpful, not just for our commander, but the whole deck. So creature and enchantment spells we control cannot be countered, and it also has a really sweet ability. For 3 and green, target land you control becomes an XX elemental creature with trample and haste until end of turn, where X is the number of enchantments you control. It's still a land. This is great. We're always going to have a bunch of enchantments, so we can make a creature just for 4 mana out of our lands. And if we're not able to protect our commander or any of our enchantments, we have cards like Oromancer, Hannah Ship's Navigator, Silent Sentinel, and Sun Titan. These can help get our enchantments from our graveyard back to our hands so we're able to cast them again, or even grabbing them from the graveyard and putting them directly on the battlefield. And Sun Titan actually works with our commander. We can send our commander to the graveyard instead of back to the command zone when it dies, and we can return it when Sun Titan enters the battlefield or when Sun Titan attacks. So how do we win the game with this deck? Well, we have Approach of the Second Sun for 6 and a white. It's a sorcery, and if we cast it the first time, it's going to be put 7 from the top of our library. And then if we cast it again during this game, we're going to win. And this is a really easy win con because we're drawing a lot of cards. There's also Nylea's Colossus for 6 and a green. It's a 6/6 giant with Constellation. Whenever Nylea's Colossus or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, double target creature's power and toughness until end of turn. Yikes, this is a great card because our commander is most likely how we're going to be dealing our opponent's damage. So we could win by commander damage, and doubling our commander's power is going to get insane, especially if we're casting a lot of enchantments during one turn or when Nylea's Colossus enters the battlefield. Now moving on to the next deck, we have Alela, Artful Provocateur for 1 white, blue, black. It's a 2/3 fairy warlock. It has flying, death touch, and lifelink. Other creatures you control with flying get +1/+0, and whenever you cast an artifact or enchantment spell, create a 1/1 blue fairy creature token with flying. So this is pretty open to what you can play, so you can go strictly artifacts or enchantments, or you can do a mix of both like this deck, because whenever we cast an artifact or enchantment, we're making that 1/1 fairy, and it has flying, so it also is promoted by our commander because creatures with flying get +1/+0. So if we're just casting a mana rock a little bit later in the game, we're making a 1/1 token with that as well, and that can add up very quickly. Reconnaissance Mission is a really great enchantment for this deck. For 2 and 2 blue, it says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. It also has cycling if we'd rather draw a card for that 2 mana, but whenever we cast this and we have our commander out, we're making that 1/1 fairy, and then later we're able to attack with our creatures, and if we deal combat damage to our opponents, we're drawing cards. And this is a really helpful way to refill our hand. And there's actually a lot of ways to draw cards in this deck. Again, we have Mesa Enchantress like I mentioned earlier, and we have Mentor of the Meek. Whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, we can pay 1 mana, and if you do, we're going to draw a card. So whenever we cast that mana rock, whenever we cast cards like Reconnaissance Mission, we can pay an additional mana whenever that creature enters the battlefield from Alela and draw a card. This is a great card to have us drawing even more cards. Also, Idol of Oblivion. I love this one. For 2 mana, it's an artifact, so again, we're getting that 1/1 from our commander. We can tap it to draw a card, and we can only activate this ability if we've created a token this turn. Well, if we have our commander out and we cast this is true, we can draw a card straight off of Idol of Oblivion. And then even later, we can pay 8 and tap it, sacrifice it to create a 10/10 colorless Eldrazi creature token. So if we really need that, that's also an option as well. There's also some removal in the deck. We have Tormod's Crypt for 0 mana, so we can cast this for 0. So we play this for free, we get that 1/1 from our commander, and we can exile someone's graveyard. There's also Seal of Cleansing. We can sack it to destroy target artifact or enchantment, and again, this is an enchantment, so it's going to trigger our commander. Now, since we're going to be having a lot of tokens, we have to include cards like True Conviction. For 6 mana, we have an enchantment, and it says creatures you control have double strike and lifelink. So now these creatures, already they're getting the +1/+0 from our commander, so they're 2/1s. If they have double strike, they're dealing 4 damage to our opponents. And if we have a lot of these guys, we're dealing a lot of damage and we're gaining life off of it as well. We can buff up our tokens with cards like Intangible Virtue and Favorable Winds. This is going to give our creatures with flying +1/+1, and they're going to gain another +1/+1 and have vigilance. And there's also a little bit of a sneaky card, Dictate of Heliod. It has flash, and it's going to give our creatures +2/+2. If our opponents decide not to block, or if we don't have enough damage at the time to kill our opponents, this is a great one to flash in. It's unexpected, and we can even win the game off of this card. Moving on to the next deck, we have Ruric, Thar the Unbowed. For 4 red and green, it's a 6/6 Ogre Warrior with Vigilance and Reach. Ruric, Thar the Unbowed attacks each combat if able. Whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, Ruric Thar deals 6 damage to that player. So when I saw this, I had the idea, what if I made a deck only with creatures so we no longer get that penalty whenever we cast a non-creature spell? Well, it is possible, I'll tell you that. And it turns out creatures can do everything. They can ramp with cards like Arbor Elf, Arboreal Grazer, Elvish Mystic, and Elysian Caryatid. In the early game, this is going to help us be able to cast spells a lot sooner, and that's going to be helpful for this deck, especially our commander being 6 mana. We don't want to wait 6 turns to be able to cast Ruric Thar. And there is removal on creatures like Acidic Slime, Manglehorn, Molder Slug, and Reclamation Sage. When Acidic Slime enters the battlefield, we can destroy target artifact, enchantment, or land, which gives us a lot of variety, and also the creature has Death Touch as well, so we can block or attack with this guy. Manglehorn is another great one, and I'm surprised it's so cheap. It's only 25 cents as of right now. When it enters the battlefield, we can destroy target artifact, which that's fine, but artifacts your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. This is like a blind obedience, but specifically for artifacts that our opponents have, this is a great one. Molder Slug is going to make it where at the beginning of each player's upkeep, they have to sacrifice an artifact. Well, we don't have any artifacts, so this is just going to be bad for our opponents. And last is the classic Reclamation Sage. When it enters the battlefield, we can destroy target artifact or enchantment. So it's going to give us a little more variety than Manglehorn. There's even board wipes like Bane of Progress and Silklash Spider. When Bane of Progress enters the battlefield, it's going to destroy all artifacts and enchantments, and then we're going to put that many +1/+1 counters on Bane of Progress for each permanent destroyed this way. This can get really good, especially if a lot of our opponents have those mana rocks or even a Rhystic Study. We're going to be able to take care of that, and then Silklash Spider is going to work with dealing damage to creatures with flying, and we can pay X for that, and it's not just a one-time thing. We can keep doing this as long as we have the mana for it. And moving on to the card draw of the deck, we have Beast Whisperer, Primordial Sage, and Soul of the Harvest. Whenever we cast a creature spell or a non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control, we're going to be drawing a card. Well, we have 62 creatures in this deck, so it's very likely we're going to be casting or having a non-token creature enter our battlefield, so there's a lot of cards to be drawn, and we can win with this deck with cards like Enray's Forerunners. This is the budget alternative to Craterhoof Behemoth. They cost the same mana, and turns out Enray's Forerunners has a little bit more power as well, but when it enters the battlefield, it's going to give our other creatures +2/+2 vigilance and trample. So if we have a lot of creatures out, we can finish the game with this card. Moving on to the next decks I recommend, and yes, I said decks, it's actually the Commander Legends Commander decks. These are pre-cons or pre-built decks that come with everything you need. I do recommend buying sleeves for these cards because that's the only thing it's lacking. These are solid products that I really recommend, and the investment for one of these is $20, which isn't bad for getting into a hobby or even just trying it. The sleeves will cost you around $10, and altogether it's going to be around $30. And the last two I want to mention are Sram and Talrand. I made these videos specifically for beginners, so you may get more value from it if you are new to Commander. But let's go over Sram really quick. For 1 and a white, we have a 2/2 Dwarf Advisor. Whenever we cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle spell, we're drawing a card. I built this specifically to be a Voltron deck, which is what people usually build, and again, there's a ton of card draw, so with our Commander and Mesa Enchantress, we're drawing a bunch of cards because auras are enchantments. So we'll have a lot of ways to make our Commander even bigger. bigger with cards like All That Glitters, Armored Ascension, Cartouche of Solidarity, and Conviction. And again, we have removal with enchantments like Cage of Hands, Pacifism, and Reprobation. What's really cool about Cage of Hands is that we can pay 1 and a white to return it back to our hand, so for 2 mana, we can keep drawing cards. And just in case we can't keep our commander, we have cards like Core Duelist, Segovian Angel, and Skyhunter Skirmisher. So when these are equipped, like Core Duelist, it's going to have double strike. Segovian Angel for 1 white has flying and vigilance, so it's not going to tap, and it can avoid those creatures on the ground, so we can really buff up this creature. And Skyhunter Skirmisher has flying and double strike, so again, we're going to be dealing twice as much damage as we normally would. And if we lose our enchantments, we can get them all back with Crystal Chimes. For 3 mana, we can tap, sacrifice it, return all enchantments from your grave to your hand. So again, that's more cards we're going to be drawing with our commander. And again, we have Sun Titan, which when it enters or attacks, we can bring a card with CMC 3 or less back to the battlefield from the graveyard, so that can be our commander. So instead of sending it to the command zone, we can send it right to the grave and bring it back. We can make our commander unblockable with cards like Prowler's Helm and Whisper Silk Cloak. So now that our commander's huge with all those enchantment buffs, now it's unblockable, so we're going to be dealing our opponents a lot of damage. And finally, we have Talrand Sky Summoner for 2 blue. It's a 2/2 Merfolk Wizard. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 2/2 blue Drake creature token with flying. Some of the notable cards are the 1 blue draw spells like Brainstorm, Fleeting Distraction, Obsessive Search, and Opt. For 1 blue, if we have our commander out, we're making a 2/2 blue Drake, as well as what the card's letting us do. We're also benefiting from removal like Bluster Squall, Unsummon, Blink of an Eye, and Boomerang. We can take care of our opponent's threats, and we're also getting the tokens from our commander. We're just casting a huge amount of instants and sorceries, so a card like Swarm Intelligence is a great card to have in this deck. So whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, we can copy that spell and we can choose new targets for the spell. And what's really nice is we can also reduce the cost of instants and sorceries with Arcane Melee. Instants and sorceries cost 2 less to cast. This is really awesome, especially when we have a card like Tamio's Epiphany. It's a 4 mana card, we can scry 4 and draw 2, which I love that already, but imagine paying 2 for that. A 1 and a blue to scry 4 and draw 2 cards, that's insane. We also have Jace's Sanctum. We reduce the cost of instants and sorceries by 1, and whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, we're going to be able to scry 1. We can get our instants and sorceries back with cards like Call to Mind, Archaeomancer, and Mnemonic Wall. And just so happens, Call to Mind is a sorcery, so we'll get a Drake off of that as well. Archaeomancer is a classic one. When it enters the battlefield, we're going to grab an instant or sorcery from our grave and put it back in our hand. And Mnemonic Wall is going to do the same thing, except it is a 0/4 defender. So we can't attack with it, but it is a great card to have. And so finally, how do we win with this deck? Well, we have a card, Stormtide Leviathan, for 5 blue. It's an 8/8 Leviathan with Island Walk. All lands are islands in addition to their other types. Creatures without flying or Island Walk can't attack, so this pretty much gets rid of most of our opponent's threats. If they don't have flying or Island Walk, well, guess what our creatures have? They have flying. So we're going to be able to still attack, which is really helpful, and we're going to have a huge amount of tokens as well. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know if you'll be building any of these decks, or if I missed a great commander for beginners. If you use the links down below to purchase the decks, you can help support the channel at no additional cost to you. And you can also support this channel through Patreon and receive benefits for doing so. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe for more Mango content, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.